Hi, I'm Wayne Willis, and this little video is for students in my class studying the history and philosophy of education in America, particularly as it relates to a movement called Reconstructionism or social Reconstructionism. And I just want to go over a few main concepts related to that. The central assumption of social Reconstructionism is that America and the world are in crisis, serious crisis. The future of the world is in danger. And therefore, we have to refocus education on the things that will be most critical for saving the world. And so there may be a lot of things that we were concerned with in education in the past that are just not critical anymore, that shouldn't be our priorities. And it might be things like, you know, memorizing states and capitals, or lines from Shakespeare, or for that matter, athletic success, basketball programs. Those kinds of things don't really matter if you're on the Titanic and it's sinking, which is sort of their attitude about the current state of affairs. Um, this think about some of the things that might make one feel like the world is in a state of crisis. Well, as I do this video in the December of 2016, we've just had a presidential election that was very shocking. The outcome was very shocking to a lot of Americans. And there seems to be a resurgence of racism and bigotry of various sorts. There's a great deal of cynicism about the effective and the legitimacy of our government, our congressmen. News has become fake news. It's very hard to get accurate information, even though we have unbelievable amount of information coming to us. And so there's this feeling that if we don't change how we do things, we're headed for real trouble. Some of the things that get emphasized most by people who have identified with social Reconstructionism have to do with the corruption of government by the input of huge corporate dollars. Some people are very paranoid about the power of the government, but the Reconstructionists, what they're paranoid is the power of the corporate interest and billionaires through the government that they contribute to, and so forth. And so they think the government ought to help protect us from the overreach of corporations. And so they're not as concerned about that they're more concerned about that than they are any overreach of the government itself. Environmental issues. We have plenty of evidence of climate change. Our best scientists in that area are telling us that we are headed for some real catastrophic realities in the near future. And we need to be preparing for that. If it's too late to prevent it, at least we should prepare. And if it's not too late to prevent it, we should do the things that will help prevent it. A breakdown in trust and values. Just an odd little example, but when I was a kid, we used to carry pocket knives to school. The boys all carried pocket knives to school. We played a little game called Mumbly Peg, where you take your knife, you stand facing each other, you throw it and stick it in the ground beyond the other person's foot. He has to put his foot where the knife is, and you basically make each other spread their legs until somebody falls. And we played this on the schoolyard in elementary school, and nobody said a thing about it. Nobody thought anything about it. Now, of course, if you carry a knife to school, you're going to be suspended almost anywhere. It's going to be a major crisis. And I think, why is that? And, well, when I was a kid, we were brought up with sense enough not to stab each other. I don't remember anybody ever getting hurt when we played with knives on the schoolyard. We were responsible enough as 9 and 10-year-olds to not hurt each other with our knives. But we can't trust 9 and 10-year-olds, or for that matter, even 15 or 16-year-olds, to be that responsible anymore. And so it creates a sense of, what is the world coming to? When I was a kid, bottles did not have seals on them. Soft drink bottles, medicine bottles, syrup bottles. You could open any of those anytime and look in them at the store. But then people started randomly poisoning folks, and so we had to put seals on those. What happened to the world that suddenly people not only attack and kill their enemies, but complete random strangers? These kinds of things create a sense of crisis. And so the Reconstructionists said, we've got some fundamental values issues that we need to deal with. And from their viewpoint, the problem is not a political one. It's not primarily a military one. It is an educational one. Because we think about violence in the Mideast or violence in Ireland, Northern Ireland. We can sign treaties and pacts until we're blue in the face. But as long as Arab and Israeli kids are brought up to hate each other, we're going to have problems in the Mideast. We can sign all kinds of agreements in Northern Ireland, but as long as Protestant and Catholic kids are brought up to hate each other, we're going to have problems. Right now, a lot of Americans are, and Westerners in general, are generalizing terrorism from a small number of Muslim terrorists to all of Islam. And if we start teaching our kids to hate Muslims, the world is not going to get better. The world is going to get worse. That we all need to teach our kids, Muslim, Christian, Jewish, heathen, atheist, agnostic, whatever, to respect and care for other human beings. And so Reconstructionism basically says we've got to focus on these kinds of issues. I mentioned the environment, but we can pass laws related to environment, but as long as we raise kids to believe that the good life is a life of using it once and throwing it away, purchasing anything and everything you want, and then throwing it away, that's going to be very, very destructive. My grandparents did not live in such a world. My parents did not grow up in such a world where the idea was to buy as much stuff and throw it away as soon as possible. And it's that consumerist attitude that defines the good life in terms of the amount of waste you generate that creates many of our problems. And so we have to have a different kind of attitude about material things, how we use them, how we purchase them, what do we do with them when we're done with them. And so we've got some big issues here, and they all go back to schooling. From the Reconstructionist view, if we teach kids enough academic content to raise their standardized test scores, but they still don't know better than to carve in the furniture or throw away perfectly good stuff or treat their classmates with kindness, then we have failed. And so this is what we have got to do along the way. Now, I'm not sure exactly. I've got some more time. So there's the handout that I've given my students. It's called Fourth 20th Century Theories of Education, and it's basically highlights from a book by George Kneller called Introduction to Philosophy of Education. It came out, I guess, in the middle of the 20th century. And I still find it to be a very useful resource. And so what I've got on this handout are some highlights from that book. You will notice, if you have it or if you've read the book, that he associates social reconstructionism primarily with George Counts and Theodore Bramald. Counts wrote a book called Dare the School Build a New Social Order in the first half of the 20th century. I'm sort of thinking it was in the 30s. I don't recall offhand. And Bramald was a major thinker in the 50s and 60s. So this is an older movement. Ironically, the sense of crisis that we're talking about didn't just start in the last 10 years. In fact, it began in the 1930s when a couple of things were happening in America that created a sense of crisis. One was the Great Depression. The economy failed. And the other was the rise of Hitler and the threat of World War II, which did, in fact, eventually happen. And so that sense of crisis was created by those kinds of things. And so George Kneller writes this book, Dare the School Build a New Social Order, which he argues we better because the world is going to hell in a handbasket. Well, when did that sense of crisis go away? I think one could argue it never really did, because we had World War II come along. And that was, obviously a spectacular crisis in our world. Then after that, we had the Cold War and the threat of nuclear holocaust. When I was a kid in school, in the second grade, we used to have nuclear bomb drills where we would practice what to do if the Soviets decided to bomb. I grew up in North Louisiana. We were worried about them bombing Barksdale Air Force Base in Bossier City, which was about 50 miles from us. And so we had these drills, atomic bomb drills. That creates a sense of crisis when you grow up feeling like there might be a nuclear holocaust any day. And of course, you think, well, when the Eastern Bloc collapsed and the Soviet Union collapsed, then that was the dawn of a new day when the sense of crisis went away, except it didn't. Because we discovered in Eastern Europe that the Soviets were actually the ones keeping a lot of people from killing each other. And when they backed out, there was a great deal of murder, genocide against people who had just been waiting to attack somebody, their neighbors. So the sense of crisis didn't really go away. And then since then, we've had the rise of terrorism, bombing in Oklahoma City, snipers shooting from overpasses in Florida, and of course, Twin Towers and everything else. And again, some of this stuff comes from foreigners, but a lot of it is Americans who are doing horrible things. Just this week, we had an American with an assault rifle rush into a pizza place where he was convinced that there was some big underground terrible thing going on just because he had read it in the fake news. And now we have the fake news, which is just, obviously a huge problem. So anyway, the sense of crisis never went away. We have a hole in the ozone. We have environmental issues. We have all kinds of stuff going on. And so what are we going to do about it? Now, the Reconstructionists say that education must commit itself here and now to the creation of a new social order that will fulfill the basic values of our culture and at the same time harmonize with the underlying social and economic forces of the modern world. Part of the issue here is that we have some traditional values we want to keep, we should keep, but we also have some that need to be changed because they don't fit the realities of our world. For example, if you lived on the frontier in 1820, you didn't consume a whole lot, and so the amount of waste you generated wasn't very much, and there were so few people out there, if you dumped your trash in the river, it didn't much matter. But now with huge population growth and huge consumerist growth, we have individuals producing enormous amounts of trash unnecessarily, and it's contributing to the environmental problem. That consumerism might not have been a problem in 1820, and it was, part of our value system, and it wasn't an issue, but now it is. Or being a rugged individualist who doesn't need the help of anybody else on the frontier. If you could live off there by yourself and don't need anybody else, don't want anybody else, that's fine. But if you take that same rugged individualist mentality and move into the inner city or the suburbs or town, it can get very ugly. And so we need a different kind of value. So we need to keep some of our traditional values. We need to abandon some of them. The new society must be a genuine democracy whose major institutions and resources are controlled by the people themselves. This means through a democratic government. Reconstructionists tend to be democratic socialists. They say that we must restrain the overreach of corporations by making sure our elected officials minimize their influence. We don't get to elect the boards of Exxon or BP or any of those companies. And they control a lot of our lives and our world. And so the people we do elect should make sure that our interests are represented. And that's called democratic socialism. The child, the school, and education are conditioned inexorably by social and cultural forces. Basically, we have to recognize the school is not an island isolated from the larger culture where we can sit around and have spelling bees and memorize Shakespeare and pretend that we don't have impure water to drink, that the kids don't have enough to eat. In fact, in Kentucky, the Family Youth Resource Centers are in many ways a social reconstructionist phenomenon because they're designed to help the kids with social problems at home that may interfere with their academic instruction. Now, the Reconstructionists would say that those social concerns are actually more important than academic instruction. Teacher must convince his pupils of the validity and urgency of the Reconstructionist solution, but must do so with scrupulous regard for democratic procedures. That is, education is fundamentally political. Teachers have political views. They should present those, but they should do so in a way that is open for students to disagree. Teachers should not pretend to be neutral. They should go ahead and lay their cards on the table and say, I'm committed to this. I think these are our problems. Here's what I'm going to do about it. Students are welcome to disagree, and this will be an exercise in democratic discourse. And finally, the means and ends of education must be completely refashioned to meet the demands of the present cultural crisis and to accord with the findings of the behavioral sciences. That is, we can't just keep doing things the way we've always done them in education. A lot of our practices don't work. They're not very effective. And so we need to do real research on how kids really learn, and we should reconstruct education in order to be effective in accomplishing our goals. Now, I'm almost out of time, so I'm going to stop right there. I could have elaborated more. But thank you for listening. I hope this is helpful.